In the previous session, we lost the connection to Ulla Agerskov in the middle of her presentation, but now you can find the entire presentation in the chat. I really recommend you to take a look on it. In this session, we will do some reflections of this conference, and we will also look forward from here. But before we do that, we will continue with maybe the most crucial part, or at least one of the most crucial parts for understanding Nordic welfare and health, the numbers and the statistical framework. Jesper Munk Markusen is a special consultant at Nomesco Nososco. Jesper will now present Nomesco Nososco, the statistic framework for understanding Nordic welfare and health. Please, Jesper, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I shall share my screen here. Yeah, I hope you all can see that.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you very much. This title was actually suggested to me by the Welfare Centre when I didn't have one, but I decided to keep it because that is what we try to produce and deliver in Nomesco Nososco. And I will talk a bit about that. I will talk about the committees, Nomesco Nososco, and about Nordic Health and Welfare Statistics, which is our new website and database, and which is very much the reason for me talking here, and about the process that led to that. And this is the website, and I will come back to that. But I assume that a number of people here might not be quite aware of who we even are. We've been mentioned a lot in the previous presentations, I noticed, but who are we even? I will talk a little bit about that first, but not too much, so you don't drown in it. Now, the committees have existed for quite a long time. We like to remind ourselves in the committees that even though we have been funded by the Council of Ministers for quite a few years, we are in fact older than them. It probably doesn't matter, but we like to think it does. And for a number of years, since the mid-80s, the committees have had a shared secretariat in Copenhagen. And after looking at each other for like 3 decades, they sort of got engaged in the middle of the 2010s and started going out to plenary meetings together. As we found that this was a very, very good idea, we essentially became one structure, which has recently been formalized in that we now today have only one mandate. This is a shared structure. We still maintain 2 committees because we need the expertise in both areas because they are not identical in the way they function, but it is, to all intents and purposes, one structure. And the important thing to understand about Nomesco Nososco is it's very much a network. Often people think that they meet Nomesco Nososco when they meet the secretariat, which is very few people. But we are a large network. I have not tried to illustrate that in the background because trying to illustrate how we function would, I think, not be useful now. But just to know that there are country representatives in the committees and in the working groups that collect the statistics and produce the text. And there are many more people beyond that involved in simply producing the data. So it is a large network of a lot of very qualified people. A thing that happened over the past decade or so is that a consensus was forming that the way we worked, the way we produced and delivered our data and our information was not fit for the demands of the times. And we had a process for finding a solution to this, we knew something had to happen. It took a while to figure out exactly how, but we made a decision in 2018 to change essentially everything about how we work. And we then had a digitalization project that ran until the launch of the database and website in June of this year, which is why this is very new and why this is a good opportunity to spread awareness of it. Now, even though the project as such is finished, the process is ongoing. It's a large thing to move this around the way we have done. And now what is it we have done and where did we come from? Well, the way we used to work was that we made yearbooks. Did that for many, many, many years. We stopped printing them at a point. So for the last few decades, they have been essentially PDF files for download. And they had lots of users, but still there were issues with that, as I think would be obvious to many. But one thing is that this is an inflexible format and they very quickly get outdated. You publish them, but then there is new data very soon. But one of the main reasons was that these were not really very well designed for keeping time series. And time series is something that everyone demands. And quite often we had people asking us for time series and we couldn't really deliver on that. We had a website, we had a database with some of the data, but all of our production line was designed for keeping these yearbooks. And we had to change all of it essentially to move forward around that. So what have we done then? We have essentially taken the content of our yearbooks and moved that to an integrated website and database with interactive visualization of data and free access to all data in the database, which is now constituted as time series. With further wider background information that was also in the yearbooks. What we have now is a unified product where the yearbooks was the central product that we produced before. Now the website and database is the product. We've also reconstituted all data. We have collected it again from scratch, as the data that we collected before wasn't useful for this purpose. So we have essentially a fresh version of what we have done before in a new format. What we've tried to do with the website is to make a welcoming design, something that shows you that this is Nordic, but also doesn't feel maybe quite as distanced as sometimes public websites do. And we hope that is reflected in the design. You also have different ways of finding what you look for. This is just the front page, and here we have topics that you can use directly, and you can go from here to the relevant articles. And when you are then here, you can go directly from the link below the visualization to the database and see what the data is that has been used for this visualization. I'll note here that we will have an update to the interface of the database coming up before Christmas. So if you go visit the website soon, you might find it looks slightly different, but it will have the same functionality. Our visualizations are interactive, so you can choose for them to show what you want in this case. You can select a specific part of the time series that you want. And you can choose what countries to show. You can also decide to download this as a document to use in your own presentations. We will have a feature coming up soon that allows you to directly download this as an Excel if you want, so that you have the data from this visualization. Also, our visualizations can be animated. They are not all animated, but they can be. We have something on the way, though there is not an estimated time for that in the future, that should allow you to take visualizations such as this and embed them on your own website if you want to. I can't say quite when that arrives, though. And obviously, if you want to, you can simply access the database directly. It is always available there in the corner of the website. And you can choose whatever table you want. Yeah, now I'll make a fast switch to something else to show you that you can also manipulate the data, and you can save the data that you've manipulated here as an Excel or in other formats. But what we aim to provide is also more than just data. We want background information, because one thing is the numbers themselves, but understanding requires more than that. Not the least in when you're working with comparing social systems and health systems, especially social systems, because the rules matter for the data. And we aim to set up our descriptions of the systems in a comparative format. So you should be able to compare them. This is a challenge, but that is our continued aim. You can say that what we do in many ways is we produce the Nordic model in a short form. That is sort of a way to look at it. The priorities we have that are guiding the work is we want to produce data and information that is accessible, user-friendly, and set up for comparability. We aim for it to be of use for the 5 areas here, though I would say if any are the main ones, it would be the top 2, Nordic cooperation and the formulation of policy in the Nordic countries. For these areas, comparing the statistics is relevant in many, many situations, and we aim to be a place where you can easily find what you look for when you want an overview. Obviously, what we do is also very useful for the media, and we should think also for educational use. In terms of research, we don't have data at the detail level usually needed for research, but we aim also to be a place where researchers can find quick information before they dig into the details. Going a bit further and looking at this as a cooperation, we also have the priority to make it as easy as possible for our contributors to produce and deliver data to us. There is a continually rising demand for data always. More data, faster data, fresher data. And we aim to make it possible for our contributors to do that. It's quite obvious, as others have mentioned previously, that we need to look at automation if we want to produce something more than just yearly data. We also want to foster shared ownership. As I said, this is a network and we aim to utilize that. We have a lot of highly qualified people and we want them to feel that they are part of this. That is how we raise the quality of what we do. And we want to actively utilize wider feedback. We knew that many people used our yearbooks, but they did probably also live a slightly more quiet existence. And This website obviously has a much higher profile and is much easier to approach. And we actively will welcome, not just from our own network, but from anyone, feedback on what we're doing. That may make us feel slightly exposed in some ways, but we really do see that as a strength. We have a lot of plans for where we want to go with this. We will continually refine the presentation because this is an ongoing process and will be. We have updates to the visual presentation tool coming very soon. We aim to publish data at least twice a year. How often we will see. We want to break out of having to publish only once when some of the data might be half a year old. But how often we can do is yet to be seen. We want thematic presentations on various topics. We're aiming for special presentation tools for specific areas. There's one here in the corner. We have data on compensation rates for various social benefits. That is data that only we have. We produce it ourselves, and we aim to have a specific presentation tool for that. That is in the works. We also very much want to work with the presentation of the rules in the Nordic social system. This is a challenge, but it is something we very much want to accomplish. Also, there will be more data. You will find some gaps if you go to the website now. As I said, we collected everything from scratch, and we found that establishing a new routine for international data collection during a pandemic is an interesting challenge. Let's just put it that way. So there are some gaps, but they will be filled. You can assume that as a given. This is version 1 of what we're doing, and we're not finished with it. And this is where you find it. Nordic Health and Welfare Statistics, nhwstat.org. And we do hope you will visit and see what we have to offer. And if you have any comments on what you find, we do hope you will give them to us. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jesper. I must say, really, really impressive work, and also really user friendly. I mean, I just got really excited. I started thinking. You said, Jesper, that the next step will be that it's possible for all to use the embedded version of your statistic. When will this be possible, do you think?
It is in the works. It's also it's slightly expensive, so we're looking at the funding. but it is in the works. I would like to give you a date for it. But I can also say that one thing that isn't quite on our website yet is that there is a sign-up function for a newsletter, which should be available very soon. I hope before Christmas, though I'm not quite certain, but very soon. So if you go there and sign up for that, we will let you know when it's there. We will not bury you in newsletters. I can tell you everybody has enough offers of those, but the function is very much simply for telling you when there is news. I would hope for the embedded function to be available over the coming months. That's definitely what we aim for.
Thank you, Jesper, for a very good presentation and also for very, very impressive work.
Thank you.
During the last 24 hours, we have heard some of the greatest experts on the Nordic welfare issues. We have learned more about the state of the Nordic welfare system or systems today. We have heard about challenges that the system is facing due to the pandemic. We have also heard about solutions and the response to the challenges. We have heard experts from Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and from other parts in Europe. At least I have got so many new impressions that it's hard for me to summarize them. Therefore, I'm very glad now to have Kenneth Nelson with me and with us. Kenneth Nelson is a professor at Swedish Institute for Social Research at Stockholm University. Kenneth is now going to reflect on the conference or the webinar theme and also look forward from here. Please, Kenneth Nelson.
Okay, thank you. I will see if I also can share my...
Yes, it's working.
Yeah, I know, but I also would like to see my notes. Okay, hang on. Okay, I think I will do it in this way. I just have a couple of slides, so I probably will just show you those slides when it's time for me to show them. So before I start, I would just like to thank the Nordic Council of Ministers, the Nordic Welfare Centre and the Finnish host for organizing this event and inviting me to look forward and reflect on the conference theme. And like many others at this conference, I also think it's a real pity that we could not meet on site in Helsinki. So I really look forward to actually meet everyone in person and to mingle and continue our discussions during the coffee breaks. Nonetheless, I'm very happy that you managed to get this organized as an online event. So the conference theme on the distinct characteristics of the Nordic welfare model and its sustainability, I think, are very timely, as we all know, but not only because it functions as a stress test of the Nordic welfare state, because I think that even before the pandemic, the Nordic welfare model had already started to change. And there were actually some signs that the Nordic welfare states were drifting apart. However, I think that the exact nature of these movements is quite unclear, and they are still, to some extent, unclear. Likewise, the consequences for social participation. And I think that over these 2 days, we have learned quite a lot about the current state of the Nordic welfare model, its many virtues, and the changes it has gone through, both during the pandemic and I also think over the long term. So from the presentations today and yesterday, I think that the Nordic countries seem to have been quite successful in counteracting much of the immediate negative social consequences of the pandemic, partly because of temporary changes in existing systems of social protection. It is also true that the pandemic has revealed areas of concern and vulnerabilities in the Nordic welfare model, and particularly in parts of public services, at least in some of the Nordic countries, and especially in my own country, Sweden, where it definitely showed some worrying signs concerning the organization of elder care. Nonetheless, as far as income protection is concerned, the responses to the pandemic seem to have been quite appropriate and by and large quite well designed. And I think that particularly, we haven't talked that much about it during this conference, but some people have noted to it. And I think that particularly the introduction of very short-term job retention schemes has been essential to avoid mass employment during the pandemic. But notably, these schemes are usually not considered to be a Nordic trademark, but rather something that we have borrowed from continental Europe and especially Germany. So but also from my engagement in the European Social Policy Network, I also think that the universal character of the Nordic social policies also mattered during the pandemic, because it's, among other things, it made it much more easier for policymakers to temporarily expand the system of social protection and reach most of the citizens. And when we compare in ESP and when we compare Sweden to many other countries in Europe who historically have a much more sort of patchy system of social protection, it became more troublesome for them to expand it and include all citizens during the pandemic. So I think also that universal character of Nordic social policies or the Nordic welfare model were quite important. But if we sort of look at the Nordic welfare model from a more long-term perspective, which I also think we have done partly at this conference, things looks a bit different, and developments are less rosy, if you could phrase it like that. So for illustrative purposes, I wanted to show you some data, and parts of this we have seen in the various sessions. So now I will try to share my screen again. Let's see, I do it like that, I do it like that. Now you should see this one in full screen, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So this is just to show you that over the longer term, I think that like I said, that the development of the Nordic welfare model is not that rosy, but we can also see that the Nordic countries are to some extent drifting apart. So this is basically just the income replacement in major social insurance schemes in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, where we are currently struggling with collecting data for Iceland. So you need to excuse me for that, not having Iceland on the screen. So it's just an average of income replacement after taxes and everything for old age pension, sickness, unemployment, and parental leave. And you can definitely see, you know, the expansion of the Nordic welfare model up to the 1980s, after which some of the Nordic countries sort of shows more of stability, whereas others show quite an extensive decline. And we can definitely see that during the financial crisis in the early 1990s, both Sweden and Finland reduced income replacement in the social insurance schemes. But whereas Finland sort of recovered, Sweden continued to cut back on the benefits. So if we take this graph as some kind of hard evidence, one could say, perhaps a little bit provocatively, that if generosity in the cash benefits is a general trademark of the Nordic welfare model, as some people during this conference have put forth, I would say that trademark today mostly exists in Norway and Finland, whether Sweden and Denmark typically, at least in the analysis that I usually perform these days, ranks somewhere in the middle of the EU distribution in terms of generosity of the cash benefits. And I should say that Denmark have always been an outlier in terms of the major social insurance schemes, relying much more on flat rate benefits than the earnings-related benefits that the other Nordic countries have. So I think that when we look at the sort of the long-term perspective, there are a lot of things going on in the Nordic welfare model. And this is also something that has been brought up during this conference. It's the Gini coefficient, a traditional measure of income inequality, and then we have the relative income power as defined by the European Union. So essentially we can see here also that the Nordic countries are drifting apart. First of all, we can see that inequality has increased in most of the Nordic countries, but we still tend to perform a little bit better than the average EU. I should say that in this case, the EU, I only included the Western European countries, the EU 15. But we still can see that both Denmark and Sweden have levels of income inequality which is higher than the other Nordic countries. In terms of relative income power, I would say that the Swedish development are quite astonishing, but from a sort of a negative point of view. And today we actually have a relative income poverty rate that is higher than the average among the Western European countries. So now I will stop showing the slide and go back here again. Just hang on a little bit. Okay, so I think that essentially that this short presentation of some hard data is essentially echoing previous insights that presented at this conference. So the Nordic countries, we have sort of effectively sheltered people from severe economic hardships during the pandemic, but over the longer term, the Nordic welfare model is not static. And to some extent, I would also say that Nordic countries seem to have drifted apart. So I gave you the example of income replacement for major social insurance schemes, but I think that at this conference, we have heard about similar tendencies of policies drifting apart in such diverse areas or topics as migration, digitalization, and active labor market policy. And I think that usually when I have these presentations and when we look at research, most of the research, at least when we look at hard data, usually concern the major cash benefits. And I think one of the reasons for that is cash benefits and income. That's pretty much what we look at. And I think that one reason why we do that is because that's where we have the data. So I think that in order to explore, this increased Nordic variation, both in social policy and in outcomes in greater detail, we need much better data. We need much more timely data. So I think that I truly appreciate the hard work that the Nordic Council of Ministers are putting into establishing a welfare indicator system for the Nordic countries, and all the work you have done that so far. And I really enjoyed the previous panel that we just listened to. And I should say that I'm actually one of those researchers who actually have used Nososco data in my own research, especially some of that data on social assistance that we had a slide on previously. But if I could come up with a few recommendations for these indicators, I think one thing that we really need is that we need more data on hard to reach groups. And hard to reach groups could be, for example, refugees, asylum seekers, but also institutionalized people. So there's quite a large proportion of people in Sweden and the other Nordic countries that we don't really know that much about, because simply they're not included in the surveys that we have. We probably can reach these hard to reach groups by all the registered data that we have. Unfortunately, as a researcher, it's very difficult for me and my colleagues to get access to this data. But maybe the Nordic countries can do something together on that. I think that would be really valuable. Another thing that we already talked about is that we really need timely data. And I don't think that we can, we can't stress the importance of timely data enough. So I think that from the perspective of promoting socially sustainable economic growth, we need to be able to place social indicators on the same footing as economic indicators. But I think that for this to happen, timely updates of our data infrastructures can't be, we really need to struggle with that. Because I don't think we ever will be able to compete with the finance ministries, for example, as long as our social indicators are lagging behind a couple of years those economic indicators that usually we have in the national accounts. So I think that we really need to push hard to get that data. Half a year ago, I think that we all thought that the pandemic was almost over, at least for the lucky few of us who actually live in the rich part of the world. But I think that now we can, we know that the pandemic will likely continue and affect us until we essentially have helped to immunize also the poorer regions of the world. So in that sense, I think the stress test of the Nordic welfare model is far from over. Perhaps we're just in the middle of the pandemic at the moment. But I also think that it would be wrong to think that we will be able to relax and the pressure that placed on the Nordic welfare model will disappear once the pandemic is over. And I think that, and we have touched upon that also during this conference, that in periods of crisis, it's quite easy to forget the more long-term pressures that call for concern, and which possibly will require a rearrangement of the Nordic welfare policy put in place. And I think that we are not lacking, such long-term challenges, and some of them we have also addressed at this conference, such as digitalization and integration of migrants. Others, I think we really need to return to once the pandemic is over. And to mention just a few, population aging, as we have heard today, will make it increasingly difficult to run a fully fledged Nordic welfare model where emphasis is placed on normal rather than minimum living conditions. At least it will be hard to do this from a financial point of view. So in that sense, I think we really need to continue to discuss the Nordic welfare model in an era of population aging, to come back to that issue after the pandemic. We also have the changed migration flows that threaten to undermine public support for citizenship-based welfare, which I think is an important principle upon which the Nordic welfare model has rested. We'll have climate change that probably will necessitate new decarbonization taxes to steer consumption in less environmentally harmful directions. But in effect, many of these taxes tend to be regressive in nature and may place a too high burden on already vulnerable groups. So the question then, from this the environmental perspective, is whether the Nordic welfare model as we have it today, or as we have organized it today, is able to sort of counteract such perverse distributive outcomes of environmental policy. And for many of these long-term challenges, we don't have any clear-cut solution. So for example, Sweden has made the public pension program financially sustainable, but with questionable results in terms of social sustainability. So thus, unintentionally, we are basically underpinning generational conflicts in Sweden, if we put it more in a more critical point of view. Denmark has restricted access to social protection of some newcomers, which doesn't necessarily have made people more supportive of immigrants and so forth. So I hope that we in future events organized by the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Nordic Welfare Centre will have the opportunity to address also these more long-term challenges, share experiences, and identify promising new areas of policymaking, as well as pitfalls in the rearrangement of the Nordic welfare model. And I also think that we need to remind us that the COVID-19 pandemic will continue to affect our societies for many years. And I actually think that many of the social consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic will not be visible until a few years into the future. And thus we need to be able to analyze and discuss these effects for many years to come, I think. Just an example, we have the issue of long-term COVID that I don't think we have talked that much about it today. We have also those exposed to prolonged social isolation, closing of schools, and so forth. So I think that these are topics that we really need to talk about also after the pandemic is over. I sort of come to an end of my presentation, and I know that if you do some kind of roundup from a conference, it should not end up in a sort of pessimistic tone, which I just have done with all the major challenges that sort of threaten to undermine the Nordic welfare model. But I think on the good side, I think the Nordic countries, as well as most of Europe, from a social policy point of view, responded much better to the pandemic than we did in relation to the 2008 global financial crisis. And perhaps this shows that we are actually learning. and that research, conferences, and debates, such as the ones we have engaged in during these 2 days, actually matter. So with these words, I would like once again to thank the organizers for what I think has been a very good, successful, important, and inspiring conference about the Nordic welfare model. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenneth. Really interesting here to get both the long-term and the comparative perspective at the same time from you, and also really sharp and important recommendations you gave us here. For example, the one of data of the hard-to-reach group and the timely data. Well done, Kenneth. Impressive work from you. We started off almost exactly 24 hours ago with a video greeting from one of our ministers here in Finland. As the last speaker at this conference, we will get the closing words from another Finnish minister. Tuomas Blomqvist is the Minister of Nordic Cooperation and Equality in Finland. Here is the video greeting from Mr. Tuomas Blomqvist. It was recorded earlier today. Please roll the tape.
Dear participants, I'm very glad to be giving the closing remarks at this Nordic Welfare Forum, which is organized as part of Finland's presidency in the Nordic Council of Ministers. This is the second time the Welfare Forum has been arranged. The aim is to monitor developments relating to welfare in our region. During these 2 days, the forum has discussed how the Nordic welfare model and our citizens have been affected by the pandemic. It is important that we evaluate the challenges our societies are facing and work together to find tools to improve the well-being of people in the Nordic region. A positive example of Nordic collaboration is the work on developing Nordic welfare indicators by the statistical committees of Nomesco and Nososko. Dear friends, the vision of the Nordic Council of Ministers is that the Nordic region will become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. Our region enjoys a high degree of economic equality and social trust. In order to achieve our vision, we must tackle climate change as well as challenges to the building blocks of our Nordic model: democracy, gender equality, and inclusion. In regards to gender equality, for example, we must do more to address violence against women, gender segregation of our labor markets, and the proportion of parental leave that fathers currently use. We also need to continue our efforts to combat gender-based discrimination, including that of sexual and gender minorities. A socially sustainable Nordic region entails inclusiveness, gender equality, interconnectedness, and strengthened welfare. Furthermore, we also need to work across sectors. The Ministers for Nordic Cooperation wish to strengthen cooperation with civil society. We have established a Nordic civil society network and created a digital portal for public consultations. Next year, we will launch a support program for NGOs with a total budget of 3 million Danish crowns. Dear participants, these past 2 years have been challenging in many ways. Due to the pandemic, we have had to refrain from many things. Above all, we have had to be flexible, adapting to new ways of doing things. It is also clear that the pandemic has been challenging for Nordic cooperation, as the Free Nordic movement, which we had come to take more or less for granted over the past decades, was temporarily interrupted. That said, our vision for 2030 is just as valid today as it was 2 years ago. If anything, the pandemic has only highlighted the importance of actively pursuing our vision. We are determined to strengthen our cooperation and advance our integration. The Nordic Council of Ministers and Nordic Council conducted a study this summer on people's views on Nordic cooperation. The results showed that Nordic cooperation still enjoys strong support, but that many were disappointed with the coordination of the pandemic response. When moving forward, it is important that we learn from the pandemic. The strong support for our cooperation is a good basis for continuing to improve our cooperation and repairing any damage that the pandemic might have caused. Dear Nordic friends, I would like to thank the Nordic Welfare Centre for organizing this event. You fulfill an important role in disseminating knowledge for welfare, providing tools for policy making, and facilitating network building. We look forward to a continued good cooperation with you. As always, we are stronger when working together. Thank you all for having taken part in the Welfare Forum.
And thank you, Minister Thomas Blomqvist. Now it's also time for me to thank you. It has been an honor to serve as your moderator here today and yesterday. And thank you also Nordic Welfare Centre and the Finnish presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers, and also a big and warm hand to all our great speakers here during this conference, and thanks to you also in the audience. You take care, stay healthy, and hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.